What's good, YouTube? When I'm back with another daily devotional. Before we get into this, make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe. And today, I want to talk about this verse right here. I'm about to speak to y'all in a minute because this one, if you really sit with it, it'll really make you look at your life different, how you move, and how you think, and how you influence other people around you. And honestly, this isn't just for people who believe. You know, this is for people who are, figuring things out, or even if you don't know where you stand with God or trying to find Him and seek Him, this still applies to you. But at the end of the day, this isn't about being perfect or me judging anybody or any of that. This is about, becoming a better person and understanding the weights in your lives. So this verse is, Matthew 18, verse 7. And he says, "Woe to the world for temptations to sin. For it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes." So look at this, right? This is Jesus. He's basically warning us about two things, right? And that is temptations in a broken world. And we live on in it. Like, we all know this. And second is basically like a personal responsibility for causing other people to fall into sin, fall into bad habits, fall into all these type of things. So I'm gonna break it down in simple terms. When he says, "Woe to the world for temptations to sin," Jesus, he's basically saying the world is full of people that pull people towards sin, towards like bad influences, pride, lust, anger, drunkenness, jealousy, all of that stuff. Because the world is falling. Like, we're gonna be tempted. It's sometimes you don't even go looking for it. Sometimes it finds you. And when it says, "For it is necessary that temptation comes," he's not saying God wants people to sin. He means that in a broken world with free will, because look, we all have free will. We get to choose what we want to do, but it's all up to us what we do in our life. You know, we all have free will. People are going to be tested. Choices are going to show up, and every choice you make has a consequence, and everybody knows that. And then he says, "But woe to the one by whom the temptation comes." And that's the last part. And this is serious because Jesus, he's basically warning us that any people who lead somebody else into sin, whether by influence, by actions, by manipulation, or by example, will be held accountable. In other words, it's one thing to struggle with temptation, but it's worse to be the reason somebody else falls spiritually. So look at it like this, right? In life, you're going to have temptation, and that's guaranteed, but it's dangerous when you're the one causing somebody else to stumble into sin. Now, let's really talk about this for a second, because some people hear the word sin and they don't even fully understand what that means. They think it's just some religious word or something like that. And, people like to just throw the word around. So I'm going to say it like this. In simple terms, sin is basically anything that pulls you away from what God wants for you in your life, God's way. It's not just about breaking rules. It's about, missing a mark. It's choosing things that go against, what's actually good for your heart, good for your soul. Ooh, excuse me. And even if you don't believe yet, think about it like this. Sin is anything that slowly pulls you away from who you are supposed to be in life. It's the stuff that makes you feel good in the moment, but over time, it messes with your mindset, your peace, your discipline, and most importantly, your purpose. And like pride, you know, for example, like pride that keeps you from growing, lust that clouds your judgment, anger, that, controls your reaction, and habits, that drain you instead of, building you up. That's what sin does in real life. It doesn't always look, noticeable at first. Sometimes it can be hard to notice, but over time, it pulls you off track. And, I've been there before. And I've grown as a person to learn these things. That's why I like to teach y'all these type of things y'all can learn from me. Because now it's just not about what you're dealing with personally. It's about what your life is doing to other people. So when Jesus says this, he's putting, responsibility on influences, like the way you move, the way you talk, the way you normalize, and the things you entertain. All this carries weight whether you realize it or not. And, that's something you really have to think about because people don't think about that. See, it's easy to live like everything is just about you, like your choices, your feelings, the way you live, you know. But in reality, people are watching you. You always have an influence on somebody around you, and some people might be learning from you. That's why, like, this not even just spiritual, but like when I give advice to my homies, I like to tell them the real, like, cause I was once that nigga that was hard headed, so I want them to learn from me. But back to what I was saying, basically all this stuff Jesus is warning us about is, it pulls us away from our purpose, and because, like, you know, it's one thing to struggle with your own battles, but it's another to become a reason someone else is struggling with theirs too. And that can look like somebody leading somebody else into compromise, making sin feel normal to somebody who's trying to live right or trying to, seek God or just living carelessly, not even realizing the example that, they're pulling them away from their purpose too. And God sees that. And speaking of purpose, sin doesn't just separate you spiritually. It distracts you from your purpose, like I said. You know, you really have to sit with that and realize that. It pulls your focus. It weakens your discipline. It keeps you stuck in cycles instead of growing to who you are really meant to be. So when you think about it like that, this isn't just about religion. This is about, you know, leading yourself into the right direction of life. This is about who you are trying to become. This is why this verse becomes, like a mirror. It's not just stay away from sin. It's also, you know, don't become the reason somebody else gets pulled into sin. Don't be the reason somebody else, you know, loses their purpose or gets distracted by things that can cause them a long-term consequence, because God cares about all this stuff. So the real question is, what is your life producing around people, producing around you? Are you trying to help people? Are you trying to motivate somebody? Are you trying to help them grow spiritually? Or are you unknowingly pulling them away from their purpose, pulling them backwards in life? Because influences isn't just small, and Jesus didn't treat it like the way it was in that verse right there. But if this spoke to you, take some time today and really reflect on that. Not in a way where you're putting yourself down or condemning you, because that's not what I'm doing, but in a way to where you're growing and becoming more aware of certain things. Because look at it like this: at the end of the day, it's not about you just walking right. It's also about making sure life isn't leading somebody else into the wrong direction. So if you're still figuring things out, that's okay too. Just start becoming more intentional about how you live and how you impact other people. Always remember that. But make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe. Yeah, y'all stay blessed.